Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and I wanted to share a concept with you. Don't sacrifice your primary for the sake of your secondary. Now this is a mistake I see a lot of people make, and I've made this mistake myself, which is why I want to share it with you so you can avoid doing this, because it hurts your efficiency when it comes to using your defensive weapon systems. And today we're going to apply this concept to a rifle setup as well as handguns to give you some ideas about what you might be doing or what you can avoid doing to be, well, better prepared overall. Now, before we get into it, I want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel, and thanks to them, I can get out here, give you information like this, and check out new gear and equipment and let you know whether or not I think it's a good idea. So big thanks to Midway USA. Now, on a rifle setup, we're going to start this conversation off regarding optics or aiming solutions in general. Now, why does that apply here? Well, because this is where I see this cardinal sin occur most often, and this is where I made my first mistakes as well. So when applying the don't sacrifice your primary for the sake of your secondary philosophy to a rifle setup regarding optics, first you have to decide what your primary aiming solution is. And on this rifle setup right now, I have three aiming solutions. We have an LPVO, we have a top-mounted red dot sight, and I have backup iron sights, okay? So on this particular setup, the primary aiming solution is going to be the LPVO, which is what it should be on yours as well if you're running an LPVO, as it probably weighs the most and takes up the most real estate. So the LPVO is my primary aiming solution, and I want to apply this concept to it. What does that mean, and what mistakes are being made sometimes out there that I see that probably hurt your ability to use this LPVO at max efficiency? The biggest one I see is people are so concerned about backup iron sights, right? They want them to be able to be on their rifle in the correct position, and they'll do just about anything to make sure that that can happen because they're concerned about their optics fragility or whether or not it's going to work for them out in the field or whatever it might be. And what happens is people start putting their backup iron sights on first, and then they force their primary optic to comply with whatever those requirements become. That means, for example, if this mount needed to be further back on this rail, but this iron sight wasn't allowing me to put it further back to where I wanted it, now I'm sacrificing my primary for the sake of my secondary, and I'm forcing my optic to be in a less optimal position on the rifle just because I'm worried about having this backup iron sight. And that's probably the biggest mistake I see happen all the time, especially regarding optics setup on defensive weapons. First shot, 0.65, 1.62 for the whole bill drill. Kind of slow, actually. When it's this cold, it's always slow. But all A zone, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Not bad. You have to prioritize the primary aiming solution over all other aiming solutions, and then you can come back and start figuring out how to work everything else into the system. But you should never reorient or make this aiming solution, your primary aiming solution, less efficient just because you want another aiming solution to work in the way that you want. You gotta prioritize your primary. Do not sacrifice its capability for the sake of your secondary, okay? So that's how it applies to optics, and I think that's pretty straightforward, but it is where I see this happening the most. Now, we can actually correlate that to other stuff you see on this rifle. Now, what do I mean by that? So, this D-ball D2 you see right here is not usable right now. It's not mounted where it would be, and it's not actually something I use on this particular rifle, but I put it on here just for demonstrative purposes for this conversation. Because right now, my flashlight would actually block the IR illuminator. So why did I put this on here? Because when you run a laser aiming module like this one, okay, and you're running an optic, this will occlude the optic depending on what level magnification you have. And right now, if I set this optic to 1x, which is what it's capable of, half of my viewing window is covered by my D-ball D2. So what is the D-ball for? It's an aiming solution to have for night vision use, right? It allows me to actively aim under night vision and engage the target. So what's your primary aiming solution? It's the LPVO. How often are you going to be night fighting? Well, as a prepared citizen, very unlikely. Is it worth practicing and is it worth being knowledgeable on? Sure. The likelihood of needing it's pretty low. So another thing I see, and this is just from personal experience, is that we're going to add this laser aiming module here on the rail and then realize that it's occluding half of my viewing window on my optic because of it being a 1x, right? And so instead of realizing that I need to prioritize the scope, I'm going to make the scope work around the laser aiming module in order to accommodate it. So now I'm going to get a 2.26 inch scope mount, or a 1.93 inch scope mount, or a scope mount that makes the scope way higher. Yeah, it solves the problem of getting over the laser aiming module, and it can create a more heads up angle for when you're using the rifle and maybe be a little bit more comfortable for you in the sense of body position. However, now your scope is even further off of your bore, which means that it's going to have a more difficult time getting an appropriate zero, and it's also going to be have more of an offset the closer you get to your target. And especially when your LPVO is your main 1x, that can be problematic. Not to mention the fact that if you still want passive night vision aiming capabilities, or you want a secondary aiming solution regarding close quarters stuff, and you want to have a top-mounted red dot, now that red dot is even higher and even further away from your bore than it would be on a setup like this, which makes it way less usable and makes it, well, much harder to zero efficiently. Always zoom. Good to go. These are all examples of not sacrificing your primary for the sake of your secondary. If this is too big to get this scope to work with it, maybe you need a different laser aiming module or something thinner, or you need to put it on the side of the gun instead of on top, or figure out something else. You shouldn't be screwing up your primary optic to accommodate something that you might never even use, right? And that's kind of how the concept applies to rifles mostly. We can apply it to other things, of course, as well. But this is really where I see that mistake happen the most. We end up screwing up the main aiming solution for the sake of all these other accessories, which don't actually hardly ever get used. So, how else can we apply this? Let's apply it to handguns as well, all right? Now, interestingly enough, this applies to me right now because I have recently made some changes, and this is something that I think a lot of us need to be a little bit more diligent about in regards to swapping platforms, okay? What do I mean? All right. So currently, based on the weather, I wear heavy gloves quite a bit, and I have my own outdoor shooting range, and there aren't really any indoor ranges in my area at all. So if I want to stay proficient and keep practicing where I live, I have to dress appropriately. If I was wearing thin gloves or no gloves right now, I would have already had to end this video because I live in North Dakota and it's very cold. So I needed to find a pistol that would work for me with heavy gloves efficiently without having to struggle. And what I decided upon was the HK USP because it has a very large trigger guard. Now, you can see here, I can fit my gloved finger in there very easily. Why is this applying to the don't sacrifice your primary for the sake of your secondary conversation? Because usually, and for a long time now, I carry Glock pistols. I like Glocks not because of their ergonomics or aesthetics or anything else. I like them because they work, they're reliable, and they have a huge logistics chain of support, right? But the HK USP allows me to use heavy gloves. And it allows me to use heavy gloves in a way that I really can't do with almost any other pistol. The trigger guard is massive, and it makes it so I can actually get out and practice no matter what the temperature. Trying to be fast out here is so silly. 201 on the first shot. At about, now, 12 yards. Let's see if we actually hit the target though. Okay, so we got one in the Charlie and then one Alpha. The HK USP also has a track record of extreme reliability and durability, which means it's a good choice if I'm not going to use the Glock as the standard for reliability and durability. This isn't just some one-off pistol from some unknown brand that nobody really knows if it's going to do well. This gun has a track record of being a very, very good pistol. Got a faster first shot, 1.86, but my split was bad. It was like a full second. I just wasn't tracking the front sight post, I guess. Let's see what happens. It's always something. Okay, well, I did slow down, but I also got better hits. We got one, I think that's the second one right there. Yeah. Or wait, no, that's it right here. So 1, 2, both A zones. Better first draw. Winter. And no, I didn't just pick this up because T-Rex Arms is starting to decide whether or not they want to support this platform. So no one get that twisted. You're hearing it from me here first, and I got video proof, all right? But regardless, if this is my primary now, which I'm carrying it right now, appendix, okay? So if this is my primary, and this was my primary, Glock 45, right? And you can see here, it's all set up. Light, red dot, ramjet, all kinds of stuff. How do I apply the philosophy here to not carrying this anymore to carrying the USP? The philosophy now is shoot what you're actually going to carry and what you're actually going to use the most. Now you can apply this to just about anything, right? Well, that was unexpected. So apply this to your handgun usage or your rifle usage or whatever firearms you're regularly using. If you're going to carry the gun and it's going to be your main go-to handgun, that needs to be the one you spend the most time on the range with and the one you shoot the most. Swapping between platforms back and forth all the time isn't beneficial. And the way it applies to this philosophy is if I'm carrying my USP, but I'm taking my Glock to the range because I like shooting it, or I'm taking my revolver to the range because it's my woods gun, or I'm taking my staccato to the range because it's my competition gun. But this is the gun I'm actually carrying, and this is the gun that I plan on fighting with if need be because of the environment I'm in, and needing to wear heavy gloves is a pretty big requirement out here. Then I'm sacrificing my primary for the sake of my secondary. All right, so we're running the Glock now just to kind of demonstrate the glove issue and see if there's any noticeable difference between performance. So it's been pretty slow with the USP. We'll see what happens. Whew. Barely get that glove in there. That dot turned up a little more. Make me feel better. Okay. First shot was 255. Okay. Split was 0.7. See if I actually hit the target at least. No. Okay. So we have a Charlie and an Alpha. So not the worst accuracy, still decent, still on target. Alpha Charlie I can live with, but that time was pretty slow and the gloves were a problem. So I'm gonna try it again. Which, when it comes to Glock, this really shouldn't be a secondary for almost anybody, but I do have some legitimate reasons here for why I'm using this gun. And as you can tell, the manual of arms is completely different. This is a double action, single action pistol that has a decocker or a safety. This is a striker fired pistol that has neither of those things. So the manual of arms is different. The magazine release is different. This is a paddle release. This is a button release. This slide release is in a different location than where this one is. Everything is different on these two guns. And eventually I'll get a USP with a red dot. But for now, I'm just practicing and working with the iron sights to get used to the platform. So if everything's different, every time I'm practicing with this, I'm not getting better at this. Now, of course, you can apply some base level of shooting to just about everything, right? The more you shoot, the better you are at shooting, and there is some truth to that, don't get me wrong. A really good shooter could pick up either one of these guns and outshoot anybody else who doesn't practice. That's just the truth. But when it comes to wanting to be as efficient as possible, and not wanting to sacrifice your primary for the sake of your secondary, you should be shooting the gun you're carrying and the one that you plan on relying on more than any other gun that you own. And everything else should be just a small percentage of trying things out or wanting to find out if maybe there's any differences between other guns that would make them become your primary. Or maybe you have some secondary reasons like, hey, this is my night vision gun, or this is my woods gun, or this is my target gun. Okay, great. But that's all secondary to self-defense. And so your primary is self-defense, your secondary is any of the aforementioned things. And now which one are you shooting the most, and what are you spending the most time on, and what are you investing in the most when it comes to logistics, magazines, holsters, everything else related to parts, right? And that's how you need to make that decision. Rather than just carrying a Glock because carrying a Glock's a good idea, which is why I've carried this Glock for so long and why I'm having an existential crisis about carrying a USP lately. But this Glock's trigger guard just doesn't work for gloves, and that's why we're doing this. But carrying the Glock and then shooting everything else besides a Glock doesn't make much sense, does it? And just to kind of demonstrate that, you can see here, trigger guard wise, there is way less space in there. And I have had my gloves hang up inside that trigger guard before by trying to get in from the outside, and then things get stuck like this. Right now I'm pushing really hard to get into that trigger guard. Like you wouldn't believe it, but I'm actually forcing my finger in there right now, and it's barely going in. The glove. Got caught in that trigger guard. All my garments came up with the Glock. First shot was 2.32. That trigger guard is just rough. Let's see if I hit the target at least. Oh, okay. So we have a Charlie over here off to the side, and then it looks like A zone. So that's what this whole conversation means. And now you can apply it to other things. And when I say that, what I mean is you can apply it to other aspects of preparedness. Don't sacrifice your primary location, your home, right, for the sake of your bug out location. Why would you make your home less livable to have a bug out location become livable, right? You need to still prioritize everything else in this same exact reference. But when it comes to guns, I think that demonstrates a pretty good point about not making those mistakes. So let me know if you have any comments or questions down below, because honestly, I'm sure some of you have made these mistakes as well. And let me know if there's solutions to make a good compromise for some of these things where you find it to be acceptable and maybe less problematic for your efficiency while still accomplishing some of the goals that we discussed being problematic on the rifle platform. If you are trying to figure out how to get all this stuff to work and the solution you come up with makes it so using your main optic is less efficient, then you probably need to reevaluate. But if you figure out a way to do all of it while having your optic, your main optic, in an efficient position, well, then you've probably achieved what we would all like to achieve. And so make sure you share that down below too, because you might be helping somebody else out. Anything else you need from me at all, go to magicprepper.com. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.